there. In this video I'm going to talk about using materials and textures with FluidDesigner for 3D printing running under Blender. So I'm assuming that you've installed FluidDesigner on your system. Now normally with FluidDesigner I tend to work in curves, NURBS and Bezier type curves, but when you're applying textures you've got to convert those to meshes first of all. So all I'm going to do is to just add a cube to my workspace there, and I'm just going to change the size of it to 10 millimeters. Okay, now there is a materials library and you can add your own objects to the materials library. So there are things like metals, for example, which you can apply, or paint, or plastics. So if you want to have a red plastic, you can select red, click OK, notice the cursor appears and you can just click on the object and the whole thing will be painted red. Other libraries that you can install yourself, so for example you could do animal ones, so here's a cheetah pattern, and again you can just apply that. So these are materials. Now if you're 3D printing at Shapeways, then you could apply the materials and get your objects printed in coloured sandstone. Alright, now, but I'm also interested more in adding textures, and we use the materials library to actually do that. So if I just add a cube again, and again I'll just change it to 10 millimeters, and if I go to my materials library and if I go to 3D textures, there is a texture here that I've installed on my system, a black and white checkerbox texture, and if I click on the box you can see I get this checkerbox image. Now what I want to do is to use this checkerbox image to apply a texture, to apply a pattern to the surface of this object, because I'm interested in 3D printing. So I'm going to delete that, and you just need to click on the box to remove the material from it. And but I'm going to use that checkerboard pattern to apply a texture to the surface of this. Now what's really important is you do need to go into edit mode, and with all of the objects selected, if you go to W and subdivide, so I'm doing W on the keyboard and subdivide, W and subdivide, before you can apply any kind of texture you really do need to increase the face count quite dramatically. You can't do this on just a single face. Okay, so if I just go to view and top view now, now the way we do it is we do this in sculpt mode, and when I select sculpt mode there I haven't got a texture. So the way to apply the texture is if I just pull down the screen there, so just below the file menu I'm pulling down the panel, and if I click on where it says I for information, I'm just going to change the top panel from the info panel to the properties panel. And in the properties panel I can select the texture button and I can add a new texture, and I can open a texture. Now because I've just been to the 3D textures folder, I can go to recent and click on 3D textures. That's where my black and white image is, and if I select black and white square, now this is just a JPEG file. Now this could be just on your desktop, it doesn't have to be in this particular 3D textures folder, it's just where I have it. This black and white square JPEG, you can download it from the internet or create it yourself, and you can open it from anywhere on your system, but I'm going to open it from that folder, and you can see that's the black and white checkerbox panel that I had. So I opened that texture. Now I can just switch this back to the info panel and just pull my screen back up there. Okay, so I open the screen, the top panel from between the file menu and the view menu. That's where I got it from. And you can see that I've now got this texture in FluidDesigner here, and I'm in sculpt mode. Now the size of the brush, this circle here, is controlled by the radius, so I'm just going to increase that a little bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to demonstrate how I can select a quarter of this. So I'm just going to point to a quarter of the top of my box, and you can see a checkerbox appearing as I click. and as I click in the four corners, so it's just the way I've done it. I could have done it in one go, but you can see what I've got there. Now if I just switch back to object mode, you can see I've added a texture, a checkerbox texture to the top of this. Okay, now the depth of that, if I go to view and front view, and if I just scroll down, now these boxes are 1 millimeter high, so the texture I've applied here is probably about 0.2, 0.3 of a millimeter, something like that. So that's maybe not quite strong enough. So if I go back to view, if I go to front view this time, and I'll do the texture on this front face instead of the top face. If I go to sculpt mode, and so there is a box here called strength. Now if I change that to say 0.75, this will make the strength of my texture stronger, and I'll just point to a quarter of the cube again, and you can already see, I should think, that the texture that's being applied is a lot stronger, so that's the strength there. And notice that I'm using add rather than subtract as well. I didn't actually tick front faces there, so no, it hasn't applied it to the back face anyway, but that's okay. So you can see this time the texture's a little bit stronger than it is at the top, and you've really just got to play around with the strength and the size of that circle as to how you actually apply the texture. Now if you want to smooth this off a little bit, if you don't want it quite as rough as that, if you go into edit mode, press A on the keyboard to highlight everything. If you do W on the keyboard, you can, sorry, not I've done the wrong thing there. I didn't want subdivide, I wanted smooth. If I do smooth, you can see I can just do it about 4 or 5 times, and that will smooth off the checkerboard effect. So that's how you can actually apply materials and apply textures in FluidDesigner for 3D printing. You can create your own material library, or you can get our material library. Now if you go on the internet, there are lots and lots of different sites on the internet where you can find images that you can use to apply textures. Here's one, Texture Ninja, but there are lots and lots of sites on the internet where you can download different images, different materials, and different textures, but they all work in roughly the same sort of way. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say in this video. Thank you.